Shabbat Sholom, everyone. So as many of you know, a little over 2 weeks ago, I traveled to Israel as a member of our Jewish Federation of Southern New Jersey's Solidarity Mission to Israel. There were 15 of us in the group, among which were Federation professional and lay leadership, 2 rabbis, and other community members, including TBS members Marv and Evie Sellers. It was by far my quickest trip to Israel, 3.5 days on the ground, but those 3 days were among the most challenging, important, and impactful days of my life. Like all of the other many missions that have gone to Israel in the last 5 months, our goal was straightforward: to bring support and chizuk, strength, to our brothers and sisters in Israel, and to bear witness to the Hamas atrocities from October 7th. I had felt a need to go to Israel since October 7th, but there was a part of me that wondered, would the money, the thousands of dollars that this brief trip cost, be better spent as a donation to Israel? I quickly learned that the answer was no. Not because Israel doesn't need our money, it does, but because the time in Israel was priceless for Israelis and for us, members of the mission alike. Allow me to explain. First, the 2 words that I heard more than any other from Israelis were thank you. To a person, Israelis were genuinely grateful and in some cases blown away by our presence and our care. They would say, it means so much to us that you would travel across the world to be with us and show your support. It helps us feel less alone. The hugs were essential. There were so many handshakes and hugs needed by us Americans and by Israelis alike. And second, it was incredibly important to bear witness firsthand to the atrocities and devastation of October 7th. To the grief and trauma of Israelis, and to the bravery and resiliency of our people. Why? More than anything, to do this, to share the stories, to educate. Whatever you think happened in Israel on October 7th, however bad you imagine it to be, I promise you it was worse. And being there, seeing it with my own eyes and hearing the stories from survivors, family members, and first responders was not only imperative to my understanding, but it kindled a fire within me to share those stories with others and to help get even more people to go on missions and trips like the one I was on. When Rabbi Peltz returned from his mission to Israel with the Masorti Conservative Movement back in November, he shared with the congregation on the Shabbat of Parshat Chayei Sarah a new phrase that Israelis were using to describe their situation. Hakol b'shever. Everything is shattered. I thought about that phrase a lot during my recent trip. While there has been rebuilding and healing that has already started in Israel, which I'll talk about later in our service, the truth is that so much remains b'shever. So much remains shattered in Israel. Everything in Israel feels different, something I immediately felt upon landing in Israel. As our flight landed, the captain of our El Al plane said over the loudspeaker, "Thank you to those who are serving in the IDF and are returning to defend our country. We all pray for better days ahead." The airport remains eerily quiet, less empty than in months past, but still bereft of people. And the mood everywhere in Israel is subdued. Hakol b'shever. People and towns in Israel remain shattered. The trauma from October 7th runs deep, the war rages on, and there's a long road to recovery ahead. Hakol b'shever. Broken pieces. In this morning's Torah portion, Parshat Pekudei, the last of the book of Exodus, we read about the completion of the building of the Mishkan, the portable dwelling place for God that the Israelites built as they began their 40-year journey in the wilderness to the land of Israel. Most of the parsha is a rehashing of the detailed material list and instructions for the building, but at the end of the parsha, it finally tells us of the Mishkan's dedication. And in Exodus chapter 40, verse 20, we'll read the following. Vayikach vayitain et ha'idut el ha'aron, ve'asam et habadim al ha'aron. He took the pack and placed it in the ark, and he fixed the poles to the ark, placing the cover on top of the ark. Moses places the tablets of the covenant inside the ark. The rabbis note that the word for tablet, edut, is in the plural. They reason that the word tablet is already plural. Then two of them must mean that Moses placed two tablets, in the ark side by side. They ask, what else? What other tablets could he have placed in the Aron? And they answer the question in the Talmud that he placed both the whole tablets and the fragments of the tablets together in the ark. Remember, when Moses returned to the children of Israel carrying the first set of tablets, the 10 Commandments, he was so outraged by the idolatry of the golden calf that he shattered that tablet on the ground. The Israelites repented, and Moses returned to the peak of the mountain, where he helped create a second pair of tablets. I've been thinking about this image and symbolism of the broken and the whole tablets of the covenant placed side by side in the ark together. And I'd like to use this image for the stories and anecdotes from Israel that I'm going to share with you this morning. When I was in Israel, this juxtaposition of the broken and the whole were quite apparent. We saw many heartbreaking examples of destruction, desecration, and also models of resilience, dedication, and unbelievable chutzpah that represent our deepest Jewish values and what it means to choose life. So this morning, throughout our Torah reading, I'm going to share a couple of stories and reflections from my trip. I'll do it through that lens of broken versus whole. First, I'll share stories of brokenness in Israel, and then I'll share stories of courage, hope, and wholeness. But first, let's start reading some Torah as we turn to Parshat Pekudei, beginning on page 564 in our red Eitz Chaim Chumash, the larger red volumes at your seats, page 564. So I'm gonna turn to some stories now, and as I shared before, I'm gonna start with those stories of brokenness. I just want to name as a disclaimer that what I'm about to share is intense. It's hard to hear, and it's very much okay if you'd like to step out for a few minutes, especially for children in the sanctuary, if you'd like them to step out for a few minutes. It's certainly understandable as we share these difficult stories. While I was only in Israel for 3 days, we saw and we heard a lot. We met with Jackie and Yaron Vital, parents of Adi Vital Kaplan, who was murdered in the safe room of her home on Kibbutz Cholit by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, while shielding and keeping her 2 young sons safe. They told us the story of her bravery, a story that has been shared on the news and must be continued to share. I'm hoping to bring Jackie and Yaron to TBS, likely via Zoom, to share Adi's story more fully with all of us. Jackie and Yaron live in Jerusalem, but Yaron has a story of his own, as he was on Kibbutz Cholit on October 7th, visiting Adi and her family for the holiday weekend. Yaron was staying in the guest house on the kibbutz. How did he survive? The terrorists never entered the home. Why not? Well, thanks to a few of the Gazan citizens who had worked daily on the kibbutz for years, the terrorists had detailed maps of the kibbutz, including maps that listed which families lived in which homes. The guest house normally sat empty and was listed as such. So they never breached the building, and Yaron's life was saved, despite 13 residents of the kibbutz being murdered in the few homes in the closest proximity to the guest house. Adi's husband and their 2 sons survived the attack and have been displaced from their home ever since. Most members of the kibbutz have been living at a hotel in Ein Gedi, but they chose to move in with family in Jerusalem. They can't go home. There are many Israelis who can't go home. In fact, there's somewhere close to 200,000 Israelis who are still displaced from their homes. We met some of them when we visited members of Kibbutz Re'im living in a high-rise apartment building in Tel Aviv, and when we went to the Ibis Hotel in Jerusalem, where the elderly from Kiryat Shmona are living. Kiryat Shmona is a town in northern Israel located about a mile or 2 from the border with Lebanon. It was evacuated on October 8th, and its residents have been living in hotels around the country. We met with a handful of elderly women from the town. They were grateful for their safety, but worried about their homes, and they missed their families. Many of them have not been able to see their families these past 5 months. They're living in small hotel rooms with no kitchens. They are cared for thanks to the incredible work of the Joint Distribution Committee. But the greatest concern they expressed to us was the following: what are we going to do for Passover? How can we possibly prepare a Seder and celebrate Passover without our families, no less? In Tel Aviv, we visited the Square of the Kidnapped, where many people gather every day to pray for the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza. And we visited the Hostage Family Forum. It's an amazing place. It is run completely by civilian volunteers. Approximately 1,000 volunteers work in the building, donated by an Israeli entrepreneur, and even more work remotely around the world. There are retired diplomats who are there to advocate for the hostages' release and who coordinate interviews for the families to share their stories. There are lawyers who deal with the banks and the landlords of hostages to make sure they know why bills and rent are not being paid. Social workers and therapists volunteer their time to work with the families. There are volunteers who cook food, meal upon meal each day, for the families of the hostages. And so much more. After learning about this impressive operation, we met with Daniel Lifshitz. Daniel is a professional Israeli soccer player who put his career abruptly on hold since October 7th to advocate for the safe return of the hostages, many of whom he knows personally. In fact, Daniel told us that of the 234 people kidnapped on October 7th, he personally knew 95 of them. You see, he grew up on Kibbutz Nir Oz. On October 7th, 42 Israelis were murdered, and an additional 75 were taken hostage from Kibbutz Nir Oz alone. The kidnapped included Daniel's best friend, Dolev Yehud, and his grandparents, Oded and Yocheved Lipschitz. Yocheved was one of the first hostages released by Hamas after being held captive in Gaza for 17 days. She has since told Daniel that they walked in tunnels for miles, were given a single piece of bread to eat each day, and how she was abused. She ended up getting sick, losing almost 25 pounds in 17 days, and was returned to Israel for sanitary reasons. The Hamas terrorists were worried about themselves getting sick. Her husband, Oded, who has significant blood pressure issues, and Daniel's friend Dolev remain hostages in Gaza. They believe Oded is still alive as a hostage who was returned after 55 days reported seeing him alive. Daniel told us that his grandmother keeps saying, "I just want to wake up one day from this nightmare and have Oded back in bed with me." Daniel concluded by saying to us, "I'm exhausted from telling their story. I need your help telling it." Our group also went down south towards the Gaza border. We visited the site of the Nova Music Festival, where makeshift memorials for the 364 individuals murdered there have been created. It felt like walking through a deserted concentration camp. I just kept hearing Jackie Yaron's voice, who the day before had told us, This was a Holocaust for us. And then we went to Kibbutz Be'eri, the most difficult experience on an all-around challenging trip. On the kibbutz, about 4 kilometers from Gaza, we could hear and feel the artillery fire happening in that moment. But first, a few numbers. Kibbutz Be'eri is a larger kibbutz with about 1,200 residents. On October 7th, it's estimated that there were between 300 and 500 terrorists who breached the kibbutz. 98 residents of the kibbutz were murdered. 35 were kidnapped. Of the 360 homes on the kibbutz, 140 were totally destroyed and 120 were severely damaged. We met with the kibbutz resident, Yarden, who walked us around the kibbutz and shared personal and graphic narratives of what happened to many of his neighbors and their homes, including to his own brother. Honestly, it's hard to describe the destruction and the devastation. It's something that you have to see with your own eyes, feel with your own feet, as you walk through the ash of utterly destroyed homes. One of the homes we stopped at was the home in which Ohad and his 9-month-old Mila, last name Cohen, were murdered. The Cohens are related to Adi Ratchis, a teacher at Kalman Brown Academy. You may remember that she told their story at our community solidarity gathering on October 10th. We called Adi on FaceTime, and with her present, we recited El Maleh, the memorial prayer and Kaddish, for Ohad, Mila, and all those murdered on October 7th. On the second evening of our trip, we met with Tali Levanon, the director of the Israel Trauma Coalition. She spoke of the deep trauma that was created on October 7th and has remained with many Israelis since. And she said, quote, "Everyone has been affected in different ways. Everybody is not breathing just right now. Basic assumptions were destroyed. Our sense of hope and optimism were shaken. Many people in our country remain stuck in grief and trauma. Israelis need to be seen and acknowledged for what they went through. It's going to take a long time to heal." That it will. But as Tali said, and as I agree, if anyone can do it, Israelis can. And then she spoke about the incredible resilience of the Israeli people, a resilience that I bore witness to time and again during my short visit. She defined resilience as knowing that you are vulnerable, yet also strong. That's powerful. Yes, there is currently a lot of pain and heartbreak in Israel. It's overwhelming. But so is the magnificent sense of resilience, the sense of we are broken, yet whole. Perhaps the ultimate message of the broken and the whole tablets being placed in the ark together is that of resilience. And it is the resilience of our brothers and sisters in Israel that I want to focus on moving forward this morning. After we read a couple more aliyot, I will share a few more stories. These stories of hope, healing, and the resilience I found in Israel. So, as I shared, yes, I found a lot of struggle, grief, and pain in Israel, but I also found a tremendous sense of resilience and hope. I found this hope in the numerous organizations we visited and met with, most of which our local Jewish Federation helps to fund. I found hope at Mount Scopus Hospital in Jerusalem, where immediately after October 7th, they quickly built an emergency hospital with 130 beds in the parking lot of their underground garage. I found hope at Sheba Hospital in Tel Aviv, where we met with leaderships of the Sasa Saton Project, an initiative that provides education and support to children in hospitals throughout the country, and who helped provide support and even therapy to the children hostages that have been released from Gaza in recent months. I found hope meeting with the founders of Project 24 in Tel Aviv, as Daniel and Bubu from Project 24 were just here at TBS last Shabbat. Many of us know now know of their incredible work to bring together the American Jewish community and Israel through projects in order to help people find their superpowers and support Israel during this time of need. And I found hope meeting with the leadership of Youth Futures in Ofakim, an organization that TBS has close ties with and supports directly. Youth Futures is helping to support and provide mentorship and aid to thousands of at-risk students in Israel and their families. A truly incredible organization. All of these organizations are incredible, but even more than the organizations, it's the people, the individual Israeli citizens and their stories that give me the greatest sense of hope. Throughout Israel, you see signs, posters, and billboards that say, Am Echad Belev Echad, one people with one heart. And you feel it. The strength, courage, and resolve are palpable. As Gil Hoffman, the executive director of Honest Reporting and the former chief political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post, told our group, you see young people on the street in Israel, and you don't know who is a hero. There are heroes everywhere. This country is full of heroes. He's so right. I met heroes, male and female, everywhere that I turned. One hero that I met on the trip was named Jan. Jan was the medic/security guard that traveled with our group. Jan is all of 21 years old, maybe 5 feet tall, but built like a tank, yet with a gentle voice. He had just completed his 3 years of service time in the IDF, where he served on a search and rescue team. Immediately after October 7th, Jan's unit was sent to several of the kibbutzim that were attacked, including Be'eri, which we visited. Their job was to search for remains for identification and burial purposes. Several of the stories that Jan shared with me are too intense and graphic to share now. After spending several weeks in the kibbutzim, Jan's unit was deployed to Gaza. Their job there was to rescue IDF soldiers if a mission or an operation went sideways or if someone became trapped or injured. He was in Gaza for 1 month. At one point, he told me, quote, if I'm going to sweat, it's not going to be because the air conditioner is not working, but because I'm saving someone's life. Among the stories from Gaza that Jan shared with me, there's one that I think best epitomizes Israel's deep sense of humanity and the inequalities of the war it is fighting. He explained that one day, a small Palestinian girl who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old started walking towards him and a few of his fellow soldiers. She had been sent to throw rocks at them. As she pelted them with rocks, she began to beg for food and water. They noticed that she was emaciated and possibly dehydrated, so they gave her some food and water. Noticing that her parents nor any adults were anywhere to be found, they scooped her up, brought her back to Israel, and left her at a hospital to be rehabilitated. Did we hear that story in the news? I really valued the time I got to spend with Jan, and honestly found myself in awe of his bravery, maturity, and positive attitude. At one point, I turned to him and said, Jan, you know you're a hero, right? Thank you for being a hero and a symbol of light during this nightmare. He thanked me, but then he responded, I don't feel like a hero. I was just trying to do what I can to help. I'm just a simple guy who loves my country, who loves my people, who loves our chutzpah. Speaking of chutzpah, one last story of a person I met in Israel, Barbara Goldstein. Barbara actually grew up in the Vineland area. She made Aliyah over 25 years ago, and now, in her young 80s, is working as a volunteer at Hadassah Hospital. One word to describe Barbara is spunk. Barbara was one of our 2 tour guides at the hospital, and she was something else. At the end of the tour, she said something particularly powerful. She said, "Here in Israel, we will be okay. It will take a long time, but we will be okay because we have you. We will be okay because we have you." And then she continued, "When you go back to the States, live your Judaism with pride. Go celebrate Purim. Celebrate at weddings and bar mitzvahs." Cue Sam Friedman. "Show the world that we will not be defeated." Sam, you becoming a bar mitzvah today, all of the hard work that you put in, the dedication and commitment you've learned from your family, in all of it, you are demonstrating in an incredible way of saying Am Yisrael Chai and living out Barbara's wish. Thank you. And then Barbara got rabbinic on us for a minute and spoke to something that further connects us to this moment today. She said, quote, "In a few weeks, we will finish reading the book of Exodus, and as we do at the end of each book, we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, and may we strengthen one another." And then she concluded, "I like to think of it as an imperative for Israelis and Jews around the world. Here in Israel, we must be strong. Chazak. Jews around the world are called on to be strong as well. Chazak. If we are each strong, then we will strengthen one another. V'nit chazek." Thank you, Barbara, Jan, Yarden, Daniel, Jackie, Yaron, and all of our brothers and sisters in Israel for allowing me to bear witness to your incredible strength, resilience, and sense of hope. Thank you for showing me the interior of the ark, what that interior ark of the tabernacle must have looked like. Broken and whole tablets together, side by side. Here in America and here at TBS, we must do our part. We must donate. Please continue to donate generously to our Am Yisrael Chai Fund. We must educate and advocate, understanding that Israel cannot rest until the remaining hostages are returned home and that Hamas must be eliminated. We must reach out to our brothers and sisters in Israel, and we must travel to Israel. Please go. We're hoping and planning to offer another TBS mission to Israel soon. Find a way to bear witness, to give hugs, because Israelis need us now more than ever. Because we are Am Echad, Belev Echad. We are broken and whole together. And together, may we be Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek.